the bankers were saved and everyone else had to suffer. And we're seeing it right now. There's the crisis part two from 2008, and everyone who's on Wall Street and is a banker is getting bailed out, and everyone else is suffering from inflation, and everyone else is suffering from price distortions and social unrest. It goes back to this idea of moral hazard, which is again the wiggle room. When the central bankers and Al Greenspan and others, or Ben Bernanke or Jay Powell says, we have the right to engage in moral hazard. We have the right to bypass ethics, morality, and the legal system to protect the functioning of these markets and to protect the liquidity of these markets. And what that's done is created an economy and a society based on fraud. So there's very little now in America that's not tied to Wall Street and therefore tied to fraud. The medical industry is now entirely fraudulent because of it's been commodified and securitized. All of banking obviously has been securitized and runs on a business model of fraud. The agricultural industry, the industrial industries, all of the sectors of the economy are tied to some degree to their cash desk where they squeeze out extra profits, engaging in fraud. It's just fraud. Right. Well, on February 26th, effectively, the U.S. Seized foreign assets and defaulted on their U.S. dollar obligations. So, similar to 1971, when the U.S. defaulted to Great Britain, when Nixon went on the gold, took us off the gold standard. And this began this 50-year experiment of all fiat money, which was really the first time ever you'd had all economies running on a fiat standard that nobody had any hard money. So, and then on February 26th was really an echo of that moment, the Nixon shock, really, when the US essentially said that the dollar is completely untrustworthy and that we're going to default and we're going to seize reserves of foreign countries whenever we want to. And I just don't think that, Greg, we've talked about convexity before and the central banks. And as a result of the 2008 bailout, they loaded up themselves with a lot of these debts. And if Enron, I'm sorry, if long-term capital management was leveraged at 100 to 1, the Federal Reserve Bank conservatively is leveraged at 50 to 1, if not closer to 80 to 1 right now. So if they try to take rates anywhere higher, you're going to have massive default at the central bank. The central bank is going to need a bailout. So in 2008, Federal Reserve bailed out Wall Street. They swapped all their bad debts for fresh treasury bills, and they put all that bad debt on the books of the Fed. Now all that bad debt is worth 0 cents on the dollar, and nobody wants to buy U.S. Debt anymore. The U.S. Treasury bond is being vomited from the reserves of countries all over the world. Nobody wants to buy U.S. debt. It's no good. It'd be stupid to buy U.S. debt. China's getting rid of their debt. Russia's gotten rid of all their debt. Japan is a huge basket case. Japan is actually the linchpin that holds together this whole global Ponzi scheme because they always had the lowest rates. And you could always do that carry trade of borrowing in Japan and putting your money into some other currency and making a positive spread and then leveraging it up 20 times. And you've got this great carry trade. But that looks like that's also blowing up. So, I mean, I understand yield curve management. I understand that they can try to bring rates to a higher level, and I can understand, but that presumes that the game has another chapter to it. I don't think there is another chapter to it. I think the Fed goes bankrupt. I think the U.S. goes bankrupt, and I think that that's what we're looking at. And I think this is why there's a lot of countries are beating the war drum right now. There's a lot of saber rattling going on, and there's the U.S. now is going to open up another front against China, as well as the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. So this is the end of empire stuff, Greg.
Yeah.
This is like America's had the world reserve currency for 100 years. It's had a great run, but it looks like this could another 5 years. The U.S. could be pretty much
I concur.
right. Well, because probably in part because the hedge fund people that are in crypto, like not to pick on Novogratz too much, but nevertheless, he is the highest profile ex hedge fund guy in the crypto space. He lives for Gamma, right? He never puts this pitch forward because it's so easy to make money shilling shitcoins. You see,
Yep.
if there was some law that applied, some serious enforcement of the current law, they don't need any new laws. All that Gary Gensler has to do is enforce the current laws, and Novograds would be forced to actually start working for a living and not just shilling crap. And he'd have to look at this trade as Greg has outlined it, and put the power of his fund and his colleagues focused on this. That's another benefit. I think that's another reason why Gary Gensler is completely a captured and unreliable regulator, because he realizes that if he took away the punch bowl of having these guys print money in the shitty way that's completely illegal, they might focus on Bitcoin more, and that would, hurt his paymasters down there on Wall Street.
Mm.
It's such an obvious trade, Greg. I mean, it's not. The credit default swap is, one of the things that make the world go round. I mean, that's one of the big bedrocks.
It's the only unmanipulated market there is left in the world, Max, in my opinion.
Okay. I mean, every trading desk in the world sits on top of CDS products to manage the stack. And so here's a put on a put, which is the same thing as a call.
Yeah.
Speaking of trading opportunities, what about GBTC, the grayscale product, which is at like a 25% discount to the net asset value? And isn't this a slam dunk trade, or what am I missing? This falls under regulatory arbitrage. So you've got a lot of money in this thing, and you've got a lot of very high priced lawyers lobbying Washington to turn this into an ETF, which I think is the arbitrage here, is that they will succeed or they will fail. But I think given the amount of money being thrown at the lobbying to convert this to an ETF, the chances of them succeeding is pretty high. So you've got a great opportunity there. I don't,
I love it as
pitched
well.
it to MicroStrategy, one of their board members, and I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, here's a way to lower your cost basis." Yeah, so the gap closes. Talking about discounts to current price. What about MicroStrategy's stock? I mean, the Bitcoin on the books is worth more than the current price of the stock by, I believe, a significant factor, and they still have an ongoing enterprise software business, which you're getting. Yeah, well, the margin call for MicroStrategy doesn't come into play until Bitcoin would get into the 2000s.
3,000.
Well, I mean, it could be just a brilliant way to dollar cost average, because anytime they even get near it, they're just going to supplement the reserve with more Bitcoin.